I remember one particular Saturday vividly. It was sunny, one of those rare perfect days that begged for spontaneity. Clara had suggested a picnic by the lake, just the two of us. She packed sandwiches and wine, and we spent hours lying on the grass, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her dreams of traveling to Greece someday, how she wanted to see the whitewashed houses perched on cliffs overlooking the Aegean Sea. I promised her we'd go. Promises. Funny how heavy they feel when you're not sure you can keep them. It wasn't long after that idyllic day that the first cracks began to show. They were subtle at first, like the faint lines on a piece of glass right before it shatters. Clara started coming home later than usual, blaming it on work. Long meetings, she'd say, her voice tinged with exhaustion. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She'd always been hardworking, and her job as a marketing executive was demanding. Still, there were moments that gnawed at me, little things that didn't quite add up. Her phone, once an afterthought, was suddenly always in her hand or face down on the table. The way she laughed at texts, smiles that weren't meant for me. The way she pulled away when I reached for her hand at night, murmuring something about being too tired. I told myself it was a phase. Every marriage has them, right? Ebb and flow, peaks and valleys. I'd read enough self-help articles to know that the spark can dim sometimes, but it doesn't mean the fire's out. So I tried harder. I planned date nights, cooked her favorite meals, even surprised her with flowers once, a gesture she used to adore. But her reactions were muted. Polite gratitude, a quick kiss on the cheek, and then she was back on her phone or buried in some work file. The more I tried to bridge the distance, the more it felt like she was drifting away. And then there was Daniel. I didn't think much of him at first. Clara introduced him as her coworker, a new hire she was helping settle into the company. He seemed harmless enough, all boyish charm and easy smiles. We even had dinner together once, the three of us, at Clara's insistence. I remember how she laughed at his jokes, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. At the time, I told myself it was just Clara being Clara. Warm, friendly, magnetic. But now, when I replay that evening in my mind, I see it differently. I see the way she leaned toward him, the way her eyes lingered a second too long. I see the way his hand brushed hers when he passed her the breadbasket, a fleeting touch that felt too intimate for two people who were just colleagues. Of course, hindsight is 20/20. In the moment, I didn't want to believe there was anything to worry about. Clara was my wife. We had history, a life we built together. Surely, no man, no matter how charming, could come between that. Could he? I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a twinge of jealousy whenever Daniel's name came up in conversation. Clara mentioned him often. How smart he was, how quickly he was learning the ropes, how much the team adored him. It was always Daniel this and Daniel that. And though she spoke of him in professional terms, there was an edge to her voice that made my stomach tighten. But I pushed those feelings down, buried them deep. Jealousy was ugly, I told myself. It wasn't who I wanted to be, so I let it go. Or at least, I tried to. The funny thing about denial is that it only works for so long. Eventually, the truth has a way of forcing itself into the light, no matter how tightly you try to keep it hidden. For me, that moment came on a quiet Tuesday evening. Clara had gone to bed early, leaving her phone on the coffee table, a rare occurrence. I wasn't proud of what I did next. Maybe it was the wine clouding my judgment, or maybe it was the gnawing doubt that had been building for weeks. Either way, I picked up her phone and unlocked it. The message was right there, glaring at me like a neon sign. I missed last night already. My hands shook as I read it again and again, the words blurring together. I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't need to. I knew. Deep down, I'd known for a while. But seeing it, seeing the proof, made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. That was the night everything changed. You never forget the moment your world starts to unravel. For me, it was that text message, "I missed last night already." 5 words that turned my stomach into knots and set my mind on a path I couldn't veer from. At first, I sat there, staring at the screen, hoping, praying that I was misreading it. Maybe it was a joke, a misunderstanding, or a message meant for someone else entirely. But deep down, I knew better. Clara wasn't one to joke about things like that, and messages don't land in the wrong inbox by accident. I set her phone down carefully, as though it might explode if I handled it too roughly, and tried to breathe. My chest felt tight, and my thoughts were spinning too fast to catch. Anger, confusion, hurt. They all collided in a whirlwind that left me paralyzed. For hours, I sat in the dim light of our living room, replaying the past few months in my mind, sifting through every interaction for clues I might have missed. Had she always been this distant, or was I just noticing it now? Had her laughter always sounded hollow when she was with me, or was that new? And Daniel. His name came up more times than I cared to admit. I couldn't help but recall the way Clara had talked about him, her eyes lighting up whenever she mentioned his name. The way she leaned just a little too close to him during that dinner, her smile lingering in a way that made my skin crawl. It wasn't enough to confront her. Not yet. I needed more. Proof. Evidence. Something undeniable. The next morning, Clara moved through our home with the same grace and ease she always had, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. I watched her go, my mind racing. That was the day I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I noticed the little things first. How her phone was always locked and within arm's reach, even in the bathroom. How she smiled at texts that she never shared with me. How she started dressing a little differently. More effort in her hair, her makeup, the kind of outfits that made me remember why I'd fallen for her in the first place. It wasn't long before I found myself checking her phone whenever I had the chance. I wasn't proud of it, but the need to know was stronger than my guilt. She didn't make it easy, though. The password changed frequently, and most of her conversations were wiped clean. But then there were the calls. At first, I only overheard bits and pieces, muffled voices through closed doors, her hushed tone when she thought I couldn't hear. One night, I lingered in the hallway outside our bedroom as she spoke in low, conspiratorial whispers. I didn't catch much, but the words "miss you" and "can't wait" hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to burst in, demand answers, confront her with everything I'd heard. But instead, I stood there in silence, my fists clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. The doubt festered, growing larger with every passing day. I started tracking her movements, noting the nights she came home late or the weekends she suddenly needed me time. I even followed her once, a move that made me feel like a jealous, paranoid fool. But it wasn't paranoia. That Saturday, I sat in my car across from a boutique cafe, my heart pounding as I watched her walk in. She wasn't alone. Daniel. He arrived 5 minutes after her, dressed casually, like they'd done this 100 times before. They sat together at a corner table, their heads close as they spoke. Clara laughed at something he said, the sound sharp and clear even from where I sat. I didn't stay long. Watching them together felt like driving a knife into my own chest. By the time I got home, I was shaking with rage, barely able to think straight. That night, Clara came home smiling. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just spent the afternoon with another man. I forced myself to smile back, though it felt like my face might crack under the strain. "I ran into an old friend today," she said casually, as if trying to fill the silence. "Anyone I know?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "No, just someone from college. Nothing important." Nothing important. Her lies were becoming more blatant, and I was growing less inclined to believe them. Still, I bit my tongue and nodded, pretending not to notice the faint trace of cologne that wasn't mine clinging to her clothes. I confided in Marcus the next day. He listened patiently as I spilled everything, from the text message to the cafe encounter. "You need to talk to her," he said. "Don't let it eat you alive." But I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, I doubled down. I checked our joint bank account for unusual transactions and found receipts for dinners and hotel stays I couldn't remember. I scanned her social media for clues, though Clara was careful not to leave a trail. And then, I found the photos. They were hidden in a folder on her laptop, buried deep within layers of innocuous files. Pictures of her and Daniel, smiling, laughing, holding hands. In one, they were sitting on a blanket at what looked like the lake where we'd once had a picnic. The same lake where I'd promised to take her to Greece someday. The betrayal was undeniable now. But instead of confronting her, I sat in the dark that night, staring at the pictures until the tears blurred my vision. I didn't just want answers. I wanted justice. They say confrontation is cathartic, that it gives you the release you need to move on. Whoever said that clearly never had to confront the love of their life about infidelity. By the time I decided to confront Clara, the evidence against her was overwhelming. The text messages, the photos, the lies. It was all staring me in the face, daring me to challenge her. And yet, as I sat there in our living room, waiting for her to come home, I felt paralyzed. What if she denied everything? Worse, what if she didn't? The sound of her keys jingling snapped me out of my thoughts. The door swung open, and there she was, smiling, radiant, carrying the faint scent of roses and something sharper, something unfamiliar. Daniel's cologne, no doubt. "Hey, Alex," she said casually, setting her bag down. "You're home early." "I took the day off," I replied, my voice tight. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered. "Oh, what about?" I gestured to the couch, and she sat down, her expression cautious. I stayed standing, pacing in front of her like a prosecutor about to present his case. "I know about Daniel," I began, my words measured but loaded with accusation. Her face went pale. For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes darting to the door as if considering an escape. Then, she laughed, a weak, nervous sound that did little to mask her panic. "Daniel? What are you talking about?" "Don't insult my intelligence, Clara," I snapped, louder than I intended. "I've seen the texts, the photos. I know about the dinners, the hotels, the lies. So don't stand there and pretend like I'm some idiot who can't see what's right in front of him." She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Alex, I didn't mean for this to happen." The words hit me like a freight train. I had braced myself for denial, for indignation, even for tears, but not for this. "So it's true," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm so sorry, Alex. I never wanted to hurt you." "Hurt me?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think saying sorry makes this better? You betrayed me, Clara. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything we built together." She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring like it was burning her skin. "I didn't plan for this. Daniel and we just connected. It wasn't supposed to mean anything." "Does it mean something now?" I asked, my voice cold. She hesitated, and in that pause, I got my answer. "It's over, isn't it?" I said, more to myself than to her. "Alex, I love you," she said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, the touch too much to bear. "But I can't lie to you anymore. I love him too." The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing closer with every breath I took. "So what now? You're just going to leave? Walk out like none of this matters?" Tears streamed down her face, but they didn't move me. "I don't want to hurt you anymore," she said. I think it's best if we separate." "Separate?" I echoed, my anger flaring again. "You mean so you can run off with him without feeling guilty?" She flinched, but she didn't deny it. "You know what, Clara? Fine. Go. Leave. If Daniel makes you so damn happy, then go be with him. But don't come crawling back when it all falls apart." She stood, trembling, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But she didn't. She just nodded, grabbed her bag, and walked out the door. I stood there, staring at the empty space where she'd been, my chest heaving with a mix of anger and despair. The silence in the house was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos raging in my mind. That night, I sat in the dark, nursing a bottle of whiskey and replaying the confrontation over and over. Her words echoed in my head. "I love him too. I think it's best if we separate." She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd chosen him. The thought made my blood boil, but beneath the anger was a deeper, more insidious feeling. Helplessness. Clara had always been my anchor, my constant, the person I thought I'd grow old with. Without her, I felt adrift, unmoored in a sea of doubt and regret. But as the hours ticked by and the whiskey dulled the edges of my pain, something shifted. My despair gave way to determination. Clara might have chosen Daniel, but this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If she thought she could waltz out of my life and into his without consequences, she was sorely mistaken. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but one thing was certain. Daniel had no idea who he was dealing with. You'd think losing your wife to another man would be the worst moment of your life. But no, it turns out the universe always has a way of outdoing itself. Because weeks later, while I was still trying to pick up the shattered pieces of my life, Daniel walked into my house. Yes, you heard me right. He walked into my house. It was a Saturday evening, and I was nursing what felt like my 100th drink of the week. The house was quiet, oppressive even, as though it mourned Clara's absence as much as I did. I had just settled into the armchair in the living room when I heard the knock. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I ignored it, hoping they'd take the hint. But the knocking persisted, loud and insistent, until it became impossible to ignore. When I opened the door, I thought I was hallucinating. There he was, Daniel, standing on my porch, dressed in a leather jacket like some kind of movie villain. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, gripping the doorframe to keep myself steady. He smiled, and it wasn't the kind of smile that made you feel welcome. No, it was smug, calculated, a predator sizing up his prey. "Alex," he said, his tone dripping with faux camaraderie, "we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I snapped, moving to shut the door. But he wedged his foot in, forcing it open just enough to slip inside. Now, he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "I come in peace." I wanted to throw him out right then and there, but my curiosity got the better of me. What could he possibly want? What nerve did it take to come here, to stand in my house as though he hadn't ripped my life apart? "Fine," I said, stepping aside. "You've got 5 minutes." He strolled in like he owned the place, his eyes scanning the room with casual interest. He paused by the bar cart, picking up the bottle of vodka I'd been working my way through. "Mind if I pour myself a drink?" "Help yourself," I said through gritted teeth, though I wasn't sure why I let him. He poured a generous measure, then sank into the armchair across from mine, swirling the glass like he was at some fancy cocktail party. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. "I just wanted to clear the air," he began, breaking the silence. I laughed bitterly. "Clear the air? You've got some nerve." He shrugged, unfazed. "Look, Alex, I didn't come here to fight. I came here to, I don't know, make sure there's no hard feelings." "No hard feelings?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You stole my wife, Daniel. You think a quick chat and a drink are going to fix that?" "She wasn't yours to steal," he said, his tone infuriatingly calm. "People aren't possessions, Alex. Clara made her choice." The words hit me like a slap, but it was his next statement that truly pushed me over the edge. "She's mine now," he said, lifting his glass in a mock toast. "You need to accept that." I saw red. Every ounce of restraint I had left evaporated in an instant. I stood, fists clenched, ready to do something, anything, to wipe that smug grin off his face. But he just leaned back, taking a leisurely sip of vodka as though he were untouchable. "You're in my house, drinking my vodka, and telling me to accept that you've stolen my wife?" I said, my voice shaking with fury. "Relax, Alex," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "It's not personal. These things happen. Not personal." The audacity of this man was beyond comprehension. My blood boiled as I stared at him, my mind racing with all the ways I could make him pay for his arrogance. But I didn't lash out, not yet. Instead, I forced myself to sit back down, masking my rage behind a facade of calm. If he thought I was going to lose control and give him the satisfaction of watching me unravel, he was sorely mistaken. "So, is that it?" I asked, my voice cold. "You came here to gloat?" "Not gloat," he said, though the smirk on his face said otherwise. "I just thought it'd be good to, clear the air. I didn't want things to be awkward." "Awkward," I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. You have no idea what you've done, do you? What I've done, he said, leaning forward, is make Clara happy. Something you clearly couldn't do. That was it. The final straw. I reached out and grabbed the glass from his hand, the vodka sloshing over the rim as I slammed it down on the coffee table. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. He raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. Or what? Or I'll make sure you never step foot in this house again. For a moment, we locked eyes, the room crackling with unspoken tension. Then, slowly, he stood, brushing imaginary dust from his jacket. Fine, he said, his tone light but his eyes sharp. I can see I've overstayed my welcome. As he walked to the door, he paused, turning back to give me one last smug smile. No hard feelings, right? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The rage coursing through me was too overwhelming. When the door finally closed behind him, I stood there, staring at the empty space where he'd been. My hands were shaking, my jaw clenched so tightly it ached. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When Daniel left my house that night, he probably thought he'd won. He strutted out the door like he was untouchable, leaving a trail of smugness in his wake. But he didn't know me. Not really. He didn't know that I'm not the kind of man who lets things slide. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the image of him sitting in my chair, drinking my vodka, and throwing his arrogant words at me. She's mine now. They echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain, stoking the fire of my anger. But anger, as I quickly realized, wasn't enough. If I wanted to make him pay, I needed a plan. Something calculated. Precise. A move so perfect it would erase the smirk from his face forever. It started with observation. Daniel had been bold enough to show up at my house uninvited, which told me two things. One, he was overconfident, and two, he underestimated me. Both were mistakes I intended to exploit. I began tailing him, not in a clumsy, amateur way, but carefully, methodically. I learned his routines, where he went, who he met, what time he left for work, and when he returned home. He was predictable, as most people are. Every Wednesday, he had drinks at a trendy bar downtown. Every Friday, he stopped by the florist to pick up a bouquet of roses, no doubt for Clara. It was during one of these stakeouts that I caught a glimpse of them together. They were sitting on a park bench, laughing, her head resting on his shoulder. It was a scene so idyllic it could have been pulled from a romance movie. Watching them, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, yes, but also something colder, more calculating. Seeing them like that didn't break me. It hardened me. I started gathering more than just information. I needed leverage, something I could use to dismantle Daniel's life piece by piece. One evening, while he was at his weekly bar outing, I broke into his apartment. It was surprisingly easy. No security system, just a flimsy lock that barely put up a fight. Inside, the place reeked of him. Sleek furniture, a well-stocked bar, a framed photo of him and Clara on the mantel. It was nauseating, but I wasn't there to admire or despise the decor. I was there to find his secrets. And secrets, as it turns out, are easy to uncover when you're looking for them. In the back of a closet, tucked behind a stack of old magazines, I found a shoebox filled with items that screamed, skeletons in the closet, a fake ID, receipts for expensive purchases that didn't match his income, a small baggie of something that looked suspiciously like drugs. But the real goldmine was a folder on his desk. It was marked confidential, and curiosity led me to crack it open. Inside were documents, work-related, mostly, but one in particular caught my eye. It was a legal notice, a warning from his company about embezzlement allegations. Bingo. I snapped photos of everything, my mind already racing with possibilities. If Daniel thought he could waltz into my life and take what was mine, I'd take everything from him. His reputation, his job, his relationship with Clara. I'd dismantle him piece by piece until there was nothing left. But I wasn't done yet. Leverage was one thing. Execution was another. I needed to lure him into a trap, something so seamless he wouldn't see it coming. That's when I came up with the idea of the reconciliation. The invitation was simple. I sent him a message, neutral, polite, the kind of thing a man trying to move on might write. Hey, Daniel, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize holding on to anger isn't healthy. I'd like to make peace. Let's have a drink and put this behind us." To my surprise, and perhaps to his credit, he responded almost immediately. "Glad to hear it. Name the time and place." I chose my house, of course. Neutral territory. Familiar to me, foreign to him. The perfect stage. Preparing for that night felt almost therapeutic. I cleaned the house meticulously, making sure everything was in its place. I restocked the bar with his favorite vodka, an ironic touch I couldn't resist. I even laid out 2 glasses, as though we were old friends catching up instead of mortal enemies preparing for battle. But beneath the surface, my true preparations were far less innocent. In the garage, I set up a small, soundproof space, just in case things got messy. I won't go into the details of what I prepared there, but let's just say I wasn't leaving anything to chance. As the hours ticked by, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't consumed by doubt or anger. I was focused, clear-headed, ready to see this through. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find Daniel standing there, all charm and confidence. He extended a hand, and I shook it, resisting the urge to squeeze harder than necessary. "Thanks for inviting me," he said, stepping inside. "Of course," I replied, gesturing toward the living room. "Let's have a drink." He didn't need to be told twice. As I poured the vodka, he made himself comfortable, lounging on the couch like he owned the place. It was almost comical, the way he underestimated me. "To moving on," he said, raising his glass. "To moving on," I echoed, though my definition of moving on was vastly different from his. As we drank, I let him talk, feeding his ego and lulling him into a false sense of security. He had no idea that the man sitting across from him wasn't the broken, defeated husband he thought he'd left behind. No, the man sitting across from him was something else entirely. And Daniel? He was about to find out exactly what. The night Daniel walked into my house for the second time, I knew it was the beginning of the end. For him, not for me. I'd laid every piece of this trap meticulously, like a hunter stalking prey. And there he was, oblivious, walking straight into it. He smiled when I handed him a glass of vodka, the same brand he'd arrogantly helped himself to during his first visit. "Glad we can be civilized about this," he said, swirling the drink in his hand. I returned his smile, though it felt like my face might crack under the weight of it. Civilized. That word rattled around in my head, almost making me laugh. He thought this was a peace offering, a white flag. It wasn't. This was war, and I had no intention of losing. We sat across from each other in the living room, a scene that would have seemed ordinary to any outsider. 2 men sharing drinks, making conversation. But beneath the surface, the air was electric with tension, charged with everything left unsaid. "So," Daniel began, leaning back in his chair, "what made you change your mind? Last time I was here, you looked like you were ready to kill me." I chuckled, a low, bitter sound. "Let's just say I've had time to think. Anger doesn't solve anything, does it?" "No, it doesn't," he agreed, taking a sip of his drink. "I respect you for that, Alex. Most guys wouldn't be able to handle this situation as gracefully as you are." Graceful. If only he knew the thoughts running through my head at that moment, he wouldn't have been so quick to compliment me. I let him talk, nodding along as he rambled about how unfortunate the whole situation was, how he and Clara never meant to hurt me, how he hoped we could all move forward. Each word was like a needle, pricking at my self-control. But I stayed calm, letting him dig his own grave. When his glass was empty, I poured him another, watching as he grew more relaxed with each sip. Alcohol had a way of loosening people up, making them careless. That was exactly what I was counting on. As the conversation drifted, I subtly steered it toward his job. "So, how's work treating you?" I asked, feigning interest. He shrugged, a smug smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Not bad. Busy, as always. But that's the price of success, right?" "Right," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Must be tough, though, with all the complications." His smile faltered, just for a moment. "Complications?" I gestured vaguely, keeping my tone casual. "You know, the embezzlement allegations. That kind of thing can't be easy to navigate." His expression shifted, the confidence in his eyes giving way to something darker. How do you know about that? I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips. Let's just say I've been doing my homework. He stared at me, his grip tightening on the glass. You've been spying on me? Spying is such an ugly word, I said, my voice calm despite the storm brewing in his gaze. I prefer gathering information. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. Daniel set his glass down, his movements sharp and deliberate. What's your game here, Alex? No game, I said, leaning back in my chair. I just think it's important to know who you're dealing with. He scoffed, shaking his head. You're pathetic, you know that? Digging through my life, looking for dirt. Is that supposed to scare me? It's not about scaring you, I replied. It's about showing you that I'm not as helpless as you think. For a moment, he just sat there, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning holes into mine. Then he stood, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't know what you're trying to prove, but this is a waste of time. Clara's with me now, Alex. You need to accept that. I stood as well, blocking his path to the door. You think this is about Clara? I asked, my voice low. This stopped being about her the moment you walked into my house the first time. He stared at me, confusion flickering across his face. What are you talking about? You didn't just take my wife, Daniel, I said, stepping closer. You disrespected me, in my own home, and I don't let things like that slide. His confusion turned to unease, his gaze darting toward the door. Alex, I don't know what you're planning, but… He didn't get to finish. Before he could take another step, I grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him toward the hallway. Let me go, he shouted, struggling against my grip. Not until we've had a real conversation, I said, dragging him toward the garage. The soundproof room I'd prepared was exactly as I'd left it, barren, cold, and unforgiving. I shoved him inside and locked the door behind us, my heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and grim satisfaction. What the hell is this? He demanded, his voice trembling as he backed away. This, I said, picking up the chair I'd placed in the center of the room, is where we settle things once and for all. The garage was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and refused to leave. The only light came from the bare bulb swinging above us, casting long shadows that danced across Daniel's increasingly panicked face. I could hear his breathing, shallow and rapid, as he stood frozen in the middle of the room. Sit, I said, pointing to the chair in the center. My voice was calm, controlled, a stark contrast to the chaos simmering beneath my skin. Alex, come on, he said, his voice shaking. Whatever this is, we can talk it out. You don't have to. Sit, I repeated, more forcefully this time. Reluctantly, he obeyed, lowering himself onto the chair with the caution of a man who knows he's walking a tightrope. I took a moment to look at him, really look at him. This was the man Clara had chosen. The man who had sat in my living room, drinking my vodka, smirking at my pain. He didn't look so smug now. Do you know what the problem is, Daniel? I began, pacing slowly around him. You thought you could walk into my life, take what's mine, and get away with it. Alex. No, I snapped, cutting him off. You don't get to talk. Not yet. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the door, as though he was calculating his chances of escape. I followed his gaze and shook my head. Don't bother. You're not leaving until I say so. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the overhead light. I let the silence stretch, watching as his discomfort grew. You know, I said, finally breaking the tension, I've spent a lot of time thinking about you, about what you represent. What I represent? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I said, stopping in front of him. You're not just some guy Clara met at work. You're a symbol, a reminder that I wasn't enough for her, that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't hold on to the woman I loved. That's not my fault, he said, his voice trembling. I didn't force her to leave you. She made that choice. I leaned in close, so close I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. You're right. She did. But you made your choices too. And now you're going to face the consequences. He flinched as I stepped back and grabbed the bottle of vodka I'd brought into the room. I poured a measure into a glass and placed it on the small table beside him. "Drink," I said. His eyes flicked to the glass, then back to me. "What is this?" "It's vodka," I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "You seemed to enjoy it last time you were here." "I'm not drinking that," he said, shaking his head. I leaned down, my face inches from his. "Drink, or I'll make you." He hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached for the glass. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice pleading. "Drink," I said again, my voice like steel. He brought the glass to his lips and took a small sip, his eyes never leaving mine. "Good," I said, straightening up. "Now let's talk." For the next hour, I laid everything bare. I told him about the nights I spent agonizing over Clara's betrayal, about the rage and humiliation I felt every time I thought of him. I didn't hold back, letting every ounce of my anger spill out into the room. And Daniel? He sat there, silent and terrified, as the weight of my words crashed down on him. "Do you even love her?" I demanded, my voice rising. He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "I thought so," I said, shaking my head in disgust. "You didn't take Clara because you loved her. You took her because you could, because it made you feel powerful. Well, how powerful do you feel now?" "Alex, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I laughed bitterly. "You didn't mean for it to happen? That's the best you've got? You didn't mean to destroy my life, but you did it anyway." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "Sorry doesn't cut it," I said, stepping closer. "Not this time." The room seemed to grow colder as I picked up the glass he'd been drinking from. "You like this vodka, don't you? It's your favorite, isn't it?" He didn't answer, his eyes wide with fear. "You sat in my house, drinking this vodka, telling me Clara was yours," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Well, here's a toast to that." I threw the glass against the wall, the sound of shattering glass echoing through the room. Daniel flinched, his whole body trembling. "You'll never drink again," I said, my voice a whisper now. He didn't understand at first, but as I picked up the rope I'd brought into the room, realization dawned on his face. "No," he said, shaking his head violently. "Please, Alex, don't do this." I didn't answer. What happened next? Well, let's just say Daniel left my house a very different man than the one who'd walked in. He'd come here confident, arrogant, convinced of his invincibility. But when he left, he knew better. After Daniel left my house that night, it was as though the air had shifted. The suffocating tension that had loomed over me for weeks began to dissipate. I stood in the garage for a while, the shattered glass and the silence around me serving as a testament to what had just transpired. For better or worse, I had taken control of the situation. Or so I thought. Daniel didn't show up in my life again. Not at my house, not in Clara's social circle, not even at his workplace. It was as if he'd disappeared, swallowed up by the consequences of his actions. I wasn't naive enough to believe he was gone forever, but for now, I could breathe. Clara, on the other hand, was a different story. It was 2 weeks after my confrontation with Daniel when Clara knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting her, and for a brief moment, I debated whether I should even answer. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door to find her standing there, looking as though she hadn't slept in days. "Alex," she said, her voice small, almost fragile. "What do you want, Clara?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, letting her into the house that had once been her home. She moved through the space cautiously, as though it might bite her. "I heard about Daniel," she said finally, turning to face me. "What about him?" I asked, keeping my expression unreadable. She hesitated, her hands twisting nervously. He's gone, Alex. He moved away. Didn't even tell me." I nodded, pretending to process the information as if I didn't already know. "That's unfortunate," I said flatly. She studied me for a moment, her brows furrowed. "You don't seem surprised." "Why would I be?" I countered. Maybe he realized he couldn't handle what he'd gotten himself into. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering in their depths. Did you have something to do with this? I met her gaze, unflinching. Do you really think I'm capable of that? She didn't answer. Instead, she looked away, her shoulders sagging under the weight of everything left unsaid. Why are you here, Clara? I asked after a long silence. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I guess I thought we could talk. Maybe try to make sense of everything. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. Make sense of what? The fact that you chose him over me? That you tore apart our life together for nothing? She flinched but didn't argue. I made a mistake, she said, her voice trembling. A mistake? I repeated, my anger bubbling to the surface. You don't get to call it that, Clara. A mistake is spilling coffee on your shirt, not betraying the person who loved you. Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't let them sway me. I'd spent too many nights drowning in my own grief to have sympathy for hers. I'm sorry, she whispered. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said coldly. It doesn't erase what you did. She nodded, her tears spilling over. I know, but I'm here, Alex. I'm here because I want to try. If there's even a chance. I held up a hand, stopping her. You don't get to decide that, Clara. Not anymore. Over the next few weeks, Clara and I fell into an uneasy rhythm. She stayed at the house more often, cooking meals and trying to fill the silence with forced conversation. But no matter how hard she tried, there was a chasm between us that neither of us could cross. I didn't trust her. I couldn't. Every time I looked at her, I saw Daniel's smug face, heard his arrogant voice saying, "She's mine now." The memory burned in my mind, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. But Clara was persistent. She apologized endlessly, trying to prove that she was committed to making things right. And part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to go back to the way things were before everything fell apart. Yet, there was always a nagging voice in the back of my mind, whispering that this wasn't over. That voice proved to be right when I received an unexpected call late one night. Alex. Clara's voice came through the line, shaky and panicked. What's wrong? I asked, my heart pounding. It's Daniel, she said. He called me. My grip on the phone tightened. What did he say? He told me he knows what you did, she said, her voice trembling. He said you threatened him. That you? Clara, I interrupted, my voice firm. Calm down. What exactly did he say? She hesitated, and I could hear the fear in her breathing. He said he's coming back, Alex. He's coming back to ruin you. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. He's bluffing, I said finally. He won't do anything. How can you be so sure? She asked, her voice laced with doubt. Because he knows better than to cross me again, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. But even as I said the words, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. Over the next few days, Clara grew more anxious, constantly looking over her shoulder as though expecting Daniel to appear at any moment. Her paranoia seeped into our fragile reconciliation, adding another layer of tension to an already strained relationship. And then, one evening, Clara confronted me. Tell me the truth, Alex, she said, her voice trembling. What did you do to him? I met her gaze, unflinching. I did what I had to do. Her eyes widened, a mix of fear and disbelief flickering across her face. You didn't. No, I said quickly, cutting her off before her imagination ran wild. But I made sure he understood that messing with me comes with consequences. She stared at me, searching my face for answers. Who are you, Alex? Because I don't think I know anymore. I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure I knew either. The story ends with Clara standing at a crossroads, unsure of whether to stay with a man she no longer recognizes or to walk away from the life they'd built together. And me? I'm left staring into the abyss, wondering if winning this battle was worth losing everything else. Somewhere out there, Daniel is nursing his wounds, plotting his next move. But one thing is certain, he'll never sit in my house, drinking my vodka, ever again.